A silent city sleeps beneath a jungle canopy, built by hands we can no longer name. This is the enduring puzzle of civilizations erased by time. By the end of this exploration, you will see the ancient world not as a graveyard of forgotten stones, but as a living library of human genius. We are going to map the architectural brilliance of societies lost to history, from vast hydraulic empires to cliffside citadels that defy logic. How did builders move mountains of stone without modern tools? And why did they encode celestial secrets into their walls? Their vanished worlds hold urgent lessons about our own place on this planet. What forgotten masterpiece do you believe still holds its greatest secret? Their stone libraries stand empty, the language of their builders a cipher we are still learning to read. This is the true nature of erasure, a concept far deeper than a city simply being left behind. A civilization vanishes not when its last inhabitant passes, but when the memory of its purpose, its stories, and its name fades from the world. Think of it as a kind of cultural twilight. The physical structures may endure for centuries, majestic and imposing, yet they become silent monuments to a people whose voice has been utterly lost. This forgetting can happen in many ways. Sometimes it is swift, born from a conflict that scatters a population or a sudden environmental shift that makes a homeland impossible. More often, it is a slow fade, a gradual process where written records crumble, oral traditions fall silent with each generation, and a society's brilliant innovations are quietly absorbed by newcomers who no longer remember the source. There is a crucial distinction here between a place being physically abandoned and a culture suffering complete amnesia. A city can be empty, yet its history might be preserved by its neighbors. True erasure is when that history itself is buried. This is where our journey of recovery begins. For every silent city, from the rock-cut facades of Petra to the meticulously planned streets of the Indus Valley, there lies a story waiting to be heard again. Archaeology and modern technology are our tools against this silence. They allow us to piece together fragments of pottery, analyze soil samples for ancient pollen, and scan the ground with lasers to see the ghostly outlines of streets and homes. Each discovery is our act of remembering, a step toward restoring identity to those who shaped our world long before our history books began. To map the architectural genius of these lost worlds, we must first acknowledge the profound quiet they left in their wake. It is a silence that asks us to listen more closely, to look beyond the obvious grandeur and see the subtle fingerprints of human thought etched into stone, earth, and landscape. What we are ultimately seeking is not just a blueprint of a building, but the recovery of a conversation across time. So let us turn our attention to the first and most fundamental expression of that genius, one that quite literally shaped the earth beneath their feet. The silent stones left behind are not mute. They are simply waiting for us to learn their language. To hear them, we have assembled a new kind of cartographer's toolkit, one that blends the patient hands of the archaeologist with the penetrating gaze of modern technology. This is not about replacing the trowel with a satellite, but about giving our eyes superhuman sight. The first and perhaps most revolutionary tool is called LiDAR, or light detection and ranging. Imagine a laser scanner mounted on an airplane, firing millions of light pulses toward the ground. In a dense jungle, most light hits the canopy, but a fraction slips through gaps in the leaves, strikes the ground, and returns. By filtering out the top layer, we can digitally strip away an entire forest. What remains is a breathtakingly detailed map of the Earth's true surface, revealing the ghostly footprints of civilization. In Mesoamerica, this single technology has rewritten history. Where we once saw isolated Maya temples rising from the green, LiDAR revealed a sprawling, continuous urban landscape of raised highways, terraced farmlands, and tens of thousands of previously unknown homes. It showed us a civilization of staggering density and planning, a revelation that came not from a decade of digging, but from a single flight. But what about the secrets buried deep beneath the soil? For that, we used tools like ground-penetrating radar. Think of it as a sophisticated echolocator, sending radio waves into the earth and listening for the bounce back from walls, foundations, or voids. It allows us to map entire city blocks, palace complexes, and even ancient plumbing systems without ever breaking ground. It is a respectful first conversation with the past, asking permission before we disturb its resting place. Then we have the art of photogrammetry. By taking hundreds of overlapping photographs of a structure from every angle, software can stitch them into a perfect, measurable three-dimensional model. This lets us study the precise angle of a carved relief, measure the erosion on a stone block, or even take a virtual walk through a site half a world away. These models become permanent digital records, safeguarding details against the relentless wear of time and weather. From even higher up satellite imagery, analysts look for subtle clues. They study the health of crops where plants growing over buried stone walls may be stunted, or where hidden irrigation channels make vegetation flourish in straight, unnatural lines. These crop marks and soil disturbances are like faint pencil sketches on a massive canvas, hinting at the grand design hidden just below. Together, these tools do more than just find ruins. They allow us to see the landscape as the ancient planner saw it. We can trace the logic of a road network, understand how a city managed its water flow from mountain spring to reservoir, and identify how buildings were aligned with celestial events. We move from collecting artifacts to interpreting a worldview, transforming scattered stones into a coherent blueprint of sophisticated thought. This technological cartography reveals that these lost builders were not just stacking rocks. They were engaged in a profound dialogue with their environment, an engineering conversation we are only now beginning to overhear. Their blueprint began with a fundamental truth we often forget: the land itself was their first and most important collaborator. This is the inaugural principle we can map, a foundational genius not of conquest but of profound harmony. For these lost builders, architecture was never about imposing a will upon the world. It was about initiating a careful, brilliant dialogue with it. They listened to the whispers of the wind, studied the path of the sun, and understood the rhythm of the water. Their constructions were responses, elegant solutions shaped by climate, topography, and the very materials under their feet. This was a symbiotic relationship, a worldview that saw humanity as a part of a larger ecological order, not its master. We can see this principle etched into stone across the globe. High in the cliffs of the American Southwest, the ancestral Pueblones built their homes not on the mesa tops, but within the canyon walls themselves. These were not random caves. They were meticulously designed apartments of stone, positioned beneath massive overhangs. The rock face served as a natural roof, shielding them from summer sun and winter snow. The orientation captured the low winter sunlight for warmth, while the deep recesses stayed cool in the scorching summer. It was a masterpiece of passive temperature regulation and natural defense, a community living in the very skin of the earth. On the other side of the world, an entirely different conversation with water was taking place. In the heart of Southeast Asia, the Khmer Empire faced a monumental challenge, a climate of intense monsoon rains followed by a long, punishing dry season. Their response was the hydraulic city of Angkor. This was not just a collection of temples, it was a vast, engineered landscape. They constructed an enormous reservoir called the West Verde, so large it functioned as an artificial lake. A complex network of canals and moats redistributed this captured monsoon water across the city and into intricate rice field systems. They were not fighting the cycle of flood and drought, they were orchestrating it, turning a climatic challenge into the very engine of their empire's prosperity. This environmental intelligence is the bedrock of their legacy. They utilized local sandstone and laterite, materials that blended with the jungle. They designed courtyards and windows to create natural ventilation, cooling palaces without a single mechanical fan. They aligned structures so the sun would mark solstices on specific carvings, weaving time itself into their architecture. In many ways, our modern pursuit of sustainable design is not an innovation, but a rediscovery. We are now striving to relearn what these civilizations knew inherently, that the most resilient and enduring structures are those that speak the language of their place. This principle of harmony was their first and most critical calculation, a silent agreement with nature that allowed everything else, their art, their astronomy, their society, to rise from a stable foundation. But once this foundational harmony was established, how did they communicate the complex ideas that held their world together? Their next layer of genius moved from the practical to the profound, encoding entire belief systems into the very geometry of their cities. The stones they placed were not just for shelter, they were a mirror held up to the sky. This second principle of architectural genius reveals a breathtaking ambition to capture the vast, cyclical movements of the cosmos and anchor them permanently into the earth. For these lost builders, the sun, moon, and stars were not distant lights. They were active participants in the story of life, and their structures were designed to conduct that celestial conversation. This was a profound blend of science, spirituality, and art, a way to make the invisible rhythms of the universe visible and tangible for an entire community. It transformed architecture from a physical space into a living calendar and a sacred instrument. Take the ancient passage tomb of Newgrange in Ireland, a massive, grass-covered mound older than the pyramids of Giza. For most of the year, its inner chamber lies in deep darkness, but for a few precious minutes around the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, a precisely engineered roof box above the entrance allows a single, narrow beam of sunlight to pierce the 60-foot-long passage. It floods the central chamber with a golden light, illuminating ancient spiral carvings. This was no accident. It was a meticulously calculated event, a guarantee that even in the deepest cold and darkness, the sun would return. It was an act of faith built in stone, a communal reassurance that the cycle of life would continue. On the other side of the world, the Sun Temple of Konark in India was conceived as a gigantic stone chariot for the solar deity, with 12 pairs of intricately carved wheels representing the months. The entire temple was oriented so the rising sun would strike the main entrance, and its architectural proportions were governed by sacred geometry, creating a sense of harmony that was believed to please the gods and bring order to the human realm. This pursuit of cosmic order often expressed itself through mathematics. Researchers have noted that the layouts of many ancient temples, from Greece to Mesoamerica, incorporate ratios like the golden ratio, a proportion found throughout nature from seashells to flower petals. By using these ratios, the builders were essentially weaving the fundamental patterns of the natural world into their creations. This sacred geometry was a language, a way to build a bridge between the earthly and the divine. These alignments served profoundly practical purposes as well. They functioned as immense, immovable calendars, telling people precisely when to plant, when to harvest, and when to hold seasonal ceremonies. When a priest or ruler could predict the sun's alignment with a temple doorway, it reinforced their authority as an interpreter of the god's will. More beautifully, these designs created experiential phenomena. On specific days, light would pour through a window to illuminate a statue, or a shadow would fall in a perfect line across a carved marker. These were moments of shared awe, a collective experience that reinforced cultural identity and spiritual belief. To map this celestial blueprint is to understand a civilization's intellectual heartbeat. It shows us a people who looked up, measured the heavens with astonishing accuracy, and then bent stone and earth to say, "We are here, and we are part of this magnificent order." Their architecture was their way of joining the cosmic dance, leaving behind a permanent record of their wonder written not on paper, but on the landscape itself, aligned with the eternal motions of the sky. These celestial calendars were built on a foundation of human will, a third principle etched not just in alignment but in staggering mass. To raise a pyramid or move a mountain of stone is an act of architectural genius that transcends engineering. It is the ultimate expression of social and organizational power. This is the realm of monumental scale and collective endeavor, where the blueprint becomes a testament to what an entire civilization can achieve when unified by a common vision. The physical dimensions of these structures awe us, but their true story lies in the invisible networks of people who conceived, coordinated, and constructed them. To map this principle is to measure not just the height of a wall, but the depth of a society's ability to dream together. Consider the silent, watchful moai of Rapa Nui, Easter Island. Each of these towering figures, some weighing over 80 tons, was carved from solid volcanic rock at an inland quarry. The unanswered question that has captivated generations is not why they were made, but how. How did a community with no draft animals or complex machinery transport these colossal statues miles across rugged terrain to their coastal platforms? Research suggests a likely answer involving a combination of clever engineering and immense communal effort. The prevailing theory points to a rocking, walking motion, where teams used ropes to carefully sway and pivot the statue forward along a prepared path. This was not the work of a few, but a sustained, orchestrated labor involving hundreds of individuals working in concert for a single goal. The statue's journey was a physical manifestation of social cohesion, a shared project that likely reinforced identity and purpose for everyone involved. Across the African continent, the stone ruins of Great Zimbabwe whisper a similar tale of collective ambition. The great enclosure, with its massive, unmortared walls standing over 30 feet high, represents the largest ancient structure south of the Sahara. The scale implies a highly organized society capable of mobilizing specialized labor, quarrying stone, and sustaining workers over years, perhaps generations. The architecture itself speaks to social structure, with different areas likely serving distinct ceremonial, royal, and communal functions. This was not haphazard construction. It was a deliberate, long-term project that gave physical form to a kingdom's authority, wealth, and cultural confidence. The wall was both a shield and a statement, declaring permanence in a world of change. These projects required more than muscle. They demanded a symphony of roles. There were the master planners and engineers who understood geometry and stress. There were artisans with specialized skills in stone dressing, carving, or sculpture. There were overseers coordinating logistics, food, and shelter. And there were the many individuals whose names are lost, who provided the sustained labor that turned vision into reality. Whether driven by a centralized authority directing tribute labor, or by a more communal model where work was a shared religious or social duty, the outcome was the same, a transformation of the landscape that no single person could ever achieve. The scale itself was the message. A pyramid reaching for the heavens communicated a ruler's divine connection and the state's absolute power. A massive defensive wall proclaimed security and strength to both citizens and potential rivals. An enormous temple complex reinforced the centrality of shared belief. These structures were built to endure, to outlast the individuals who created them, and become permanent anchors for cultural memory. They were a civilization shouting its presence into the future, a declaration that we were here, we were capable, and we mattered. To stand before them today is to feel the echo of that collective will, a force that could align thousands of hands toward a single, horizon-altering purpose. Yet, for all their grandeur, these monuments were not the end of the story. The most ingenious designs often addressed a far more immediate and vital challenge, one that flowed not from quarries but from the sky and the earth itself. The most enduring monuments are not just shaped by grand visions, but by the very chemistry of the earth they stand upon. This is the fourth principle we can map, a quiet genius found not in blueprints, but in the kiln, the forge, and the mixing pit. These lost civilizations were master material scientists, conducting centuries-long experiments with the local landscape to create substances that would defy their own time. Their engineering was a dialogue with physics and chemistry, yielding solutions so elegant we still marvel at them today. They understood that to build for eternity, you must first reinvent the stone. Consider the rust-proof pillar of Delhi, an iron column erected over 1,600 years ago, in a city known for its humid climate, where modern steel succumbs to corrosion in years. This ancient pillar stands completely untouched by rust. It bears no paint, no protective coating, just the smooth, dark metal forged by artisans whose names are lost. Modern analysis suggests its secret lies in a high phosphorus content, a deliberate or fortunate impurity from the smelting process that created a thin, protective film on the surface. This was not magic, it was an advanced, empirical understanding of metallurgy, a recipe perfected through generations of observation and practice. Across the ancient world, another material defied logic: Roman concrete. While our modern concrete crumbles in decades, especially in seawater, the Roman harbors of Caesarea and Portus are still intact after 2 millennia. Their secret was a specific ingredient, volcanic ash from the region of Pozzuoli. When mixed with lime and seawater, this ash triggered a chemical reaction that created crystals interlocking within the material. The concrete did not just resist water, it actually grew stronger when submerged, healing its own tiny cracks over time. This was a technology born from necessity and a deep familiarity with local geology, turning a volatile volcanic product into the bedrock of an empire's infrastructure. Then there is the silent puzzle of Inca stonemasonry at sites like Sacsayhuaman and Machu Picchu. Enormous blocks of granite, some weighing over 100 tons, are fitted together with such precision that a razor blade cannot slip between them. No mortar was used, the joints are complex, interlocking puzzles with faces that are slightly convex, allowing them to settle and lock during earthquakes. The method of achieving this perfection remains a topic of study, but it speaks to an incredibly sophisticated tradition of stoneworking, where masons learn to read the grain of the rock and shape it through patient abrasion with sand and water. This was engineering as an art form, where resilience was built into every irregular, intimate connection. Their material mastery extended to surfaces as well. The brilliant Maya blue pigment, used for centuries in murals and ceremonial objects, is a synthetic compound so stable that it survives where other colors fade. Researchers believe it was created by carefully heating a mixture of indigo dye and a special local clay, fusing the organic and mineral into a new, lasting substance. Similarly, the production of lime plaster for floors and walls was a technological triumph, requiring controlled high-temperature kilns to transform limestone into a versatile, durable binder. To map this principle is to appreciate a different kind of intelligence, one built on accumulated, hands-on knowledge. It was a science of trial and error, where successful recipes became guarded cultural treasures passed from master to apprentice. They did not have laboratories, they had workshops and construction sites as their testing grounds. Each batch of concrete, each forged alloy, each batch of pigment represented a victory over entropy, a small pact with permanence. They looked at a volcano and saw a binder, at a particular ore and saw a rust-proof pillar, at a block of granite and saw a puzzle piece for a quake-proof wall. This deep, localized wisdom allowed their architectural dreams to take physical form, creating legacies in stone and metal that continue to whisper their secrets to those who know how to listen. A city's true genius is not found in any single building, but in the silent logic of its streets. This is the fifth principle we can map, the architectural blueprint of society itself, written in urban planning and social infrastructure. The layout of a forgotten metropolis is a direct reflection of its values, its hierarchy, and the daily rhythm of its people's lives. To walk its ghostly avenues is to understand the administrative mind that sought to bring order, health, and community cohesion to thousands of souls living in close quarters. This was social theory rendered in stone and clay, a conscious effort to design not just spaces but a functioning civilization. Consider the astonishing cities of the Indus Valley, like Mohenjo-Daro, which flourished over 4,000 years ago. They were laid out on a precise grid pattern with wide main streets and smaller lanes branching off in an orderly fashion, but the true stroke of genius lay beneath their feet. They built the world's first known sophisticated urban sanitation system. Nearly every house had a bathing area and was connected to a covered, city-wide network of drains and sewers. Waste was channeled away from living spaces, and many homes even had simple chutes for collecting trash. This was not merely convenience, it was a profound, early understanding of public health, a design meant to prevent illness and ensure the well-being of the entire community. Their planning speaks of a society deeply concerned with collective harmony and civic order. In stark contrast, the great Maya cities of Mesoamerica followed a different organizational logic, one centered on cosmic and ceremonial power. Their layout was not a uniform grid but a purposeful constellation. At the heart stood the sacred precinct with its towering pyramids, palaces, and ball courts, often aligned with celestial events. Radiating outward from this potent center were districts of lesser nobles, artisans, and then the dispersed residential compounds of the wider population, connected by raised causeways through the jungle. This was a city designed to visually and physically reinforce social hierarchy and spiritual authority. The center was the axis of the world, the place where the human and divine realms met, and everything else was organized in relation to it. Elsewhere, urban planning answered the demands of environment and defense. Across the Sahara, the fortified communal structures known as caissars, built from sun-dried earth, rose like castles from the desert. These were not sprawling cities but dense, vertical, inward-looking complexes. Their labyrinthine passages, shared walls, and limited entrances provided crucial shade and defense in a harsh, open landscape. The design maximized security and minimized exposure to the elements, reflecting a social life that prized communal solidarity and protection above expansive public squares. Across these varied models, we see conscious zoning. Areas were designated for specific crafts like metalworking or pottery, keeping fumes and fires away from homes. Markets were placed at key intersections to facilitate trade. Open plazas served as gathering points for ceremonies, announcements, and social interaction, acting as the civic heart. The very width of a street often managed the flow of goods and people, with main thoroughfares built to accommodate processions or trade caravans. Managing waste and water supply was a primary concern, directing clean water in and waste out through engineered channels. This intricate planning required a governing authority with remarkable foresight, capable of surveying land, allocating space, and enforcing codes over generations. It was architecture operating at the scale of society, a physical attempt to solve the complex puzzle of how humans live together peacefully, productively, and sustainably. To map these urban footprints is to finally hear the murmur of daily life, to reconstruct the experience of a merchant navigating crowded lanes, a child playing in a courtyard, or a family gathering water from a communal well. The stones tell us of their brilliant solutions, but the spaces between those stones whisper of the lives they were built to contain. The city's grand avenues and towering temples were all made possible by a single, life-giving element, water. This brings us to our first detailed case study, the hydraulic empire of Angkor. For centuries, the sprawling capital of the Khmer civilization lay hidden beneath the relentless embrace of the Cambodian jungle, its name all but erased from global memory until explorers began to document its ruins in the 19th century. To truly map its architectural genius, we must look not just upward at its iconic spires, but downward at the vast, engineered landscape it sculpted from the earth. Angkor was not merely built on the land, it was a profound conversation with water itself, a dialogue of survival and symbolism on an almost unimaginable scale. The central challenge was the region's extreme climate, a cycle of drenching monsoon rains followed by a long, severe dry season. The Khmer engineers' response was a masterpiece of hydrological planning, a network of reservoirs and canals so extensive it functioned as a man-made circulatory system for an entire civilization. At its heart were the massive barrays, gigantic artificial reservoirs. The largest, the West Barray, stretches nearly 5 miles long and over a mile wide, an inland sea crafted by human hands. These were not just passive storage ponds, they were the linchpins of a complex grid. A meticulously calculated system of canals, dikes, and moats distributed this captured monsoon water across the urban expanse and into vast, fertile rice fields that could support a population historian's estimate in the hundreds of thousands. But this system served a purpose far greater than simple irrigation and flood control. It was a symbolic, physical representation of the Hindu cosmos. In this belief system, the mythical Mount Meru stands at the center of the universe, surrounded by concentric mountain ranges and continents, all floating in a primordial ocean. The architects of Angkor translated this cosmic diagram directly onto the landscape. The central temple mountain, whether at Angkor Wat or the Bayon, represented Mount Meru. The immense square moats encircling these temples were not just for defense, they were the cosmic ocean. The radiating canals and reservoirs mirrored the celestial order. To live and work within this engineered landscape was to inhabit a living model of the universe, a daily reinforcement of spiritual and social order. The Temple of Angkor Wat itself is the ultimate expression of this principle. Its iconic profile, with 5 towers resembling lotus buds, is just the most visible part of a profound architectural code. The entire complex is an earthly model of the heavenly realm. The long causeway leading to the main entrance crosses the vast moat, a symbolic journey from the mortal world to the sacred center. The gallery walls are adorned with miles of intricate bas-reliefs depicting epic myths, celestial dancers, and historical processions, literally wrapping the cosmos in stone. Every proportion, every axis, every reflection in the surrounding water was carefully calculated to create a space where architecture, religion, and natural philosophy became one. The erasure of Angkor's central political power, a process influenced by environmental shifts and broader regional changes, did nothing to diminish the awe-inspiring scale of its planning. For centuries, the jungle reclaimed its streets, and the true extent of its genius remained obscured. It is only now, through the eyes of modern technology, that we are beginning to fully comprehend its scope. Aerial surveys and advanced radar imaging have peeled back the forest canopy and penetrated the soil, revealing a metropolitan area far larger than once believed, with suburban sprawls, neighborhood temples, and an intricate water management grid that extended for dozens of miles. This mapping shows us a civilization that did not fight its environment, but orchestrated it, turning a climatic challenge into the very source of its majesty and longevity. Their legacy is a powerful reminder that the greatest architectural triumphs are often those that work in harmony with the most fundamental forces of nature. Angkor's cosmic waters flowed through channels of absolute order, but another civilization found its genius in the opposite direction, in the embrace of profound vertical scarcity. High in the sun-baked canyons of the American Southwest, the ancestral Pueblones, often remembered by the Navajo word Anasazi, chose not to dominate their landscape, but to become a part of its very bones. Their architectural masterpiece was not a sprawling hydraulic grid, but an intimate, intricate conversation with the cliff face itself. To map their legacy is to understand a blueprint written not for abundance, but for brilliant survival in a world of limited resources. Sites like the breathtaking Cliff Palace in Mesa, Verde are not ruins perched on a ledge. They are the cliff reimagined as a community. Builders used the local sandstone, shaping blocks directly from the canyon walls and binding them with a mortar of mud, ash, and water. They fitted wooden beams, often from sturdy pinyon pine or juniper, into sockets carved into the living rock, creating a framework that anchored multi-story structures to the mountain. This was architecture as an extension of the geology, a seamless fusion that provided extraordinary benefits. The overhanging cliff acted as a massive natural roof, shielding the dwellings from summer sun and winter snow. The thick stone walls provided superb thermal mass, keeping interiors cool in the searing heat and retaining warmth during cold desert nights. This was passive climate control engineered centuries before the term existed. But their genius addressed an even more critical need: water. In an arid environment, every drop was precious. They engineered their entire settlement as a catchment system. The cliff overhang itself channeled rainfall off the mesa top, and they built clever drainage channels and carved depressions in the rock to direct this water toward collection areas. Cisterns and reservoirs were often integrated into the complex, ensuring a vital reserve. Their positioning was also strategic for defense, with access limited to narrow footpaths and scalable only by hand and toe holds, offering protection in a challenging time. Within these stone cities, the spatial organization speaks volumes about their social world. The complexes are not random clusters, they are carefully planned neighborhoods. There are large circular rooms called kivas, built partially underground, which served as the spiritual and ceremonial heart of the community. Surrounding them are clusters of rectangular living and storage rooms, suggesting a social structure centered around clan or family units. The layout creates a sense of both communal gathering and private family space, all within the compressed, vertical environment of the alcove. The placement of rooms, the alignment of doorways, and the use of plazas all point to a society with defined rituals and a deep understanding of how architecture shapes human interaction. Then, around the 13th century, these magnificent cliff dwellings were largely left behind. The reasons for this migration are complex and still studied, likely involving a combination of prolonged drought, resource depletion, and social changes. It was not an erasure of failure, but a strategic adaptation, a movement toward new opportunities. Their departure adds a layer of profound mystery, but the silent cities they left behind are not tombstones. They are powerful testaments to a society that did not merely endure a harsh world, but thrived within it by listening to its constraints. They looked at a sheer cliff and saw a shelter, a fortress, and a water collector. Their architectural form was a direct, eloquent response to scarcity, proving that limitation can be the mother of the most ingenious design. The silent, mortarless walls of Great Zimbabwe rise from the earth not as ruins but as a declaration. In the highlands of southern Africa, this sprawling complex of stone stands as a monumental testament to a pre-colonial African achievement that was nearly erased twice, first by time and then by a deliberate colonial narrative. Mapping the architectural genius here is not just about studying walls. It is an act of reclaiming a stolen history, restoring the voice of the Shona civilization that built an empire from trade and stone. The most awe-inspiring feature is the dry stone wall construction, especially the iconic Great Enclosure. Its curved outer wall stretches over 800 feet in length and rises to a height of 32 feet in places, built entirely without mortar. Each granite block was carefully shaped by hand, selected for its fit, and stacked in courses that gently taper inward as they rise. This was not a haphazard pile of rocks. The builders possessed a deep, practical understanding of gravity and stability. The walls were constructed with a rubble core, and their graceful curves distributed weight and stress, allowing them to withstand centuries of wind and weather. The result is both formidable and beautiful, a seamless blend of engineering and artistry that speaks of a highly skilled, specialized class of craftsmen. The layout of the entire city reveals the blueprint of a complex, stratified society. The hill complex, perched on a granite dome, likely served as a royal palace and spiritual center, a place of authority looking down upon the realm. Below it lies the Great Enclosure with its famous conical tower and narrower, parallel passageways, an area researchers believe was dedicated to the royal family or specific rituals. Further out, the valley ruins consist of numerous smaller stone enclosures, suggesting the homes of citizens, artisans, and traders. This was not a random settlement, it was a carefully zoned capital, its architecture physically mapping the social and political hierarchy of a sophisticated state. Its strategic location was no accident either. Great Zimbabwe sat at the crossroads of major trade routes that connected the interior goldfields and ivory sources to ports on the Indian Ocean coast. The wealth that flowed through this hub in the form of gold, copper, and precious goods funded its construction and sustained its power. This was the heart of a vast commercial network, its stone walls built not just for defense, but as a permanent advertisement of its prosperity and stability to traders from distant lands. For generations, European colonists refused to believe such sophistication could be indigenous. They attributed the ruins to Phoenicians, Arabs, or the biblical Queen of Sheba, anyone but the African people who lived nearby. This was a cultural erasure as profound as any physical decay, an attempt to sever a continent from its own magnificent past. Modern archaeology has utterly overturned those myths, painstakingly linking the site's artifacts, building techniques, and oral histories directly to the Shona people. To walk among these stones today is to witness a reclamation in progress. Every precisely fitted block is a rebuttal to those old, dismissive narratives. The walls of Great Zimbabwe do not whisper, they speak clearly of indigenous innovation, economic prowess, and a mastery of statecraft that shaped southern Africa for centuries. They remind us that mapping lost architectural genius is often about restoring truth as much as it is about measuring stone. Stone can shout a civilization's name across millennia, but wood whispers, and earth returns quietly to the earth. This presents our greatest cartographic challenge, mapping architectural genius that was never meant to be permanent. For countless societies, their most profound structures were crafted from materials that breathe, bend, and eventually vanish, leaving behind only the faintest of ghosts. To see their world, we must learn to read the empty spaces, the subtle stains in the soil, and the silent testimony of the descendants who remember. This expands our map beyond the monumental, into the realm of the ephemeral, where intelligence was measured not by endurance, but by exquisite adaptation to a dynamic life. Across the dense, rain-soaked forests of the Pacific Northwest, towering longhouses once stood, their massive frames hewn from giant cedar trees. These were not simple shelters, but immense community halls, sometimes over 100 feet long, that housed multiple families under a single, soaring roof. Their genius was a deep understanding of the material. Builders would split enormous planks from living trees using wedges and mauls, a technique that respected the wood's natural grain, creating strong, resilient boards. The structures were held together with complex joinery, wooden pegs, and woven cordage without a single metal nail. The design was perfectly suited to the environment, with pitched roofs shedding constant rain and raised floors for air circulation. When a site was moved or a house renewed, the materials often returned to the forest. Today, archaeologists find only the circular patterns of post holes, dark organic stains where mighty support beams once stood, outlining the generous footprint of a community's heart. On the vast Eurasian steppe, another form of ephemeral genius reached its zenith, the mobile palace. The Mongol Empire, at its height, administered a continent from magnificent tent cities that could appear and disappear on the horizon. The Great Zimbabwe or yurt is a masterpiece of portable engineering. Its circular lattice wall collapses into a compact bundle, while the roof poles and felt covering can be loaded onto pack animals. Within hours, a sturdy, weatherproof home capable of withstanding fierce winds is erected, its door always facing south for optimal light and spiritual tradition. For grand gatherings, these jurs were arranged in precise, orderly circuits around the ruler's larger tent, creating a movable capital of astonishing scale and social order. The architectural intelligence here is one of logistics, mobility, and climate control, a design philosophy that conquered distance itself. To map this empire is to trace not stone foundations, but seasonal migration routes and the points where these portable cities gathered to wield world-changing power. Even in settled, forest-rich regions of Eastern Europe, Slavic peoples built elaborate fortified towns and temples entirely from timber. These wooden fortresses, or kremlins, featured intricate log construction with interlocking corners, complex gatehouses, and tiered defensive walls. Their wooden churches displayed a breathtaking virtuosity of carpentry, with layered, shingled domes and elaborate iconostases, all achieved through precise joinery. Fire, decay, and the simple need for new lumber meant these structures were constantly rebuilt, leaving little for the distant future to find. Archaeologists piece them together from the remnants of charred timber, the layout of palisade trenches, and the tools left behind, evidence of a vibrant architectural tradition that shaped the skyline of an entire region for centuries. Reconstructing this vanished world requires a different kind of evidence. We look for postmolds, the distinct soil discolorations left by a rotted wooden post. We analyze patterns of hearths and midden deposits, the domestic debris of daily life, to understand where walls might have been. We turn to ethnography, studying the building techniques and oral histories of descendant communities, to breathe life into those soil stains. This work acknowledges a profound truth. Architectural greatness is not defined by how long a structure lasts, but by how perfectly it served its people and its moment. These ephemeral masterpieces speak of a deep, sustainable dialogue with local resources, of societies that built for need and ceremony rather than for eternity. They remind us that our map of human genius is incomplete if we only chart the monuments that survived the storm. We must also learn to see the beauty and brilliance of the shelter that was designed to fold its walls and travel with the wind. Their walls were never silent, they were speaking in a grammar of stone. For the builders whose names we have lost, architecture was far more than shelter or spectacle. It was a dense, deliberate language. Every line, every angle, every carved motif was a word in a complex sentence about their universe. To truly map their genius, we must learn to read this symbolic code, moving beyond the engineering to the poetry etched into the very fabric of their cities. This is the art of decoding the world, you embedded in form, a process that transforms a ruin from a puzzle of construction into an open book of belief. The first and most powerful symbols are found in orientation. An east-facing entrance was rarely just a practical choice for morning light, it was an invocation. It aligned the community with the daily rebirth of the sun, a physical statement of hope and renewal. In ancient Egypt, temples were often laid out on an east-west axis, so the rising sun would flood the inner sanctuary and illuminate the cult statue of the god, performing a daily miracle of light. Similarly, many Maya temples have doorways and stairways aligned with the sun's position on the solstices or equinoxes, turning the entire structure into a colossal calendar that marked sacred time. This directional language spoke of a cosmos governed by precise, observable order and humanity's place within that celestial rhythm. Then we encounter the recurring forms that echo across continents, speaking to shared human questions. The pyramid is perhaps the most universal. In the smoggy valleys of Mesopotamia, they built stepped ziggurats as artificial mountains, bridges between the earthly plane and the realm of the gods. Along the Nile, the smooth-sided pyramids became colossal ramps for the pharaoh's soul to ascend to the stars. In the jungles of Mesoamerica, the stepped pyramid temple represented the sacred mountain of creation, its summit the place where priests could commune with the heavens. Despite vast differences in construction and culture, this form repeatedly answered a profound need to create a tangible ladder between the human and the divine. The language becomes even more vivid in zoomorphic and anthropomorphic design, where architecture takes on the shapes of powerful beings. The Great Temple of Angkor Wat is designed to resemble Mount Meru, but walk its galleries and you are surrounded by a stone tapestry of divine and mythical figures. At the rock-cut temples of Ellora in India, entire monasteries are carved from a single hillside, with facades depicting scenes from Buddhist and Hindu lore, the rock itself seeming to breathe with story. In West Africa, the tall, tapered forms of Sudano-Sahelian mosque towers are often said to evoke the termite mound, a natural structure of remarkable ventilation and resilience, linking human ingenuity to the intelligence of the land. Perhaps no structure better embodies architecture as enacted myth than the Mesoamerican ball court. This was not a sports arena as we understand it. It was a ritually charged space shaped like a capital I, with sloping walls and stone rings set high on the sides. The game played here was a reenactment of cosmic struggle, often symbolizing the movement of the sun and stars or a mythic battle between life and death. The architecture framed the action, the sloping walls directing the hard rubber ball's movement, the rings representing portals to the other world. The outcome held profound, sometimes solemn, significance for the community, believed to influence harvests and the favor of the gods. The court was a stage where mythology became physical spectacle. Decoding this symbolic language requires us to ask different questions. We stop asking simply how a wall was built and start asking why it was built this way. Why is this chamber circular and underground? It may represent the womb of the earth, a place of spiritual emergence. Why are these columns carved to resemble palm trees? They may transform a palace hall into a symbolic sacred grove. This interpretative mapping connects cold stone to warm belief, to the stories that gave people identity, explained the mysteries of nature, and guided their moral universe. When we learn to read this language, the silent city begins to murmur with the voices of priests chanting, of crowds gathering for a solstice dawn, of players in a sacred game. The architecture becomes a permanent testament not just to what they could build, but to what they dared to believe. The language of belief was carved in stone, but its first word was a question of pure physics. How do you move a mountain when all you possess are ropes, logs, and the collective will of a community? This puzzle of megalithic transport and construction stands as one of history's most tangible mysteries, a silent challenge issued by every multi-ton stone block set perfectly in place by hands we can no longer see. To map this genius, we must move from admiring the finished monument to reverse engineering the staggering process, an endeavor that reveals not magic, but a profound, practical mastery of the physical world. Consider the blue stones of Stonehenge. These distinctive pillars, each weighing up to 4 tons, were quarried from the Preseli Hills in West Wales, a journey of over 150 miles to the Salisbury Plain. The builders of the late Neolithic period had no wheels, no draft animals, and no metal tools. So how did they accomplish this? The prevailing theory involves a combination of human ingenuity and the landscape itself. After being extracted from the rock face using stone mauls and thermal shock from fire and water, the stones were likely loaded onto wooden sledges. These sledges could then have been pulled over a track of greased logs, acting as rollers by large teams of people. For the final waterborne leg of the journey, they might have been floated on rafts along rivers and the coast, using the tides to assist their movement. This was not a single eureka moment, but a chain of brilliant, adapted solutions, each overcoming a specific geographic obstacle. On the remote Pacific island of Rapa Nui, the mystery of the Moai statues presents an even more vivid picture of communal engineering. The question of how these giants, some weighing over 80 tons, were transported from the inland quarry to coastal platforms miles away has sparked decades of debate and experimentation. One compelling theory, supported by recent archaeological studies and successful tests, suggests the statues were walked. Using a system of ropes, teams could rock the statue from side to side, pivoting it forward with each sway. This upright, walking motion, requiring coordinated rhythm from hundreds of individuals, would explain the worn, rounded bases found on many statues abandoned along the ancient roads. It turns a silent monolith into a participant in a grand, rhythmic procession, a physical manifestation of a society moving in unison toward a shared goal. The construction phase required another layer of innovation, the art of the lever and the counterweight, to raise a massive lintel stone onto uprights, as seen at Stonehenge or in the temples of Malta. Builders likely employed an ingenious technique called cribbing. They would gradually build a wooden ramp or framework around the standing stones, then use levers to inch the lintel upward, placing timber supports underneath with each small lift. For raising an obelisk or a moai onto its platform, a large earth ramp may have been constructed, allowing the stone to be dragged or levered into position before the ramp was removed. These methods speak of monumental patience, a project measured not in days, but in seasons and generations. Recent experimental archaeology has been crucial in demystifying these feats. By using only period-appropriate tools and materials, researchers have demonstrated that these proposed methods are not only possible but efficient when fueled by organized labor and deep, accumulated knowledge. These experiments highlight the acute observation behind the techniques, an understanding of friction, balance, center of gravity, and mechanical advantage learned through centuries of trial and error. Mapping this aspect of genius forces us to abandon any notion of lost super science or extraterrestrial intervention. The true wonder lies in the human scale of the achievement. It was the power of coordinated muscle, the clever application of simple machines, and the unwavering commitment to a vision that would outlive every individual who contributed to it. They looked at a colossal stone and saw not an impossibility, but a series of small, solvable problems. Their greatest tool was not a miraculous device, but a society capable of unifying its effort toward a single, horizon-altering purpose, turning the seemingly immovable into the foundation of their legacy. Their monumental stones were raised by societies that first had to feed themselves, a challenge that demanded an even more fundamental kind of architecture. The most enduring civilizations did not just build upon the land, they sculpted it into a partner for survival. Across the steepest slopes and most arid mountains, they performed a quiet miracle of engineering, carving the very earth into vast, stair-stepped gardens known as agricultural terraces. This was not mere farming, it was a profound act of landscape transformation, a technology that turned inhospitable terrain into fertile, life-sustaining breadbaskets. To map this genius is to trace the lines where human need met geological possibility, creating a form of architecture that did not house people, but nourished them for generations. The principle is deceptively simple. By cutting a series of level steps into a hillside, you slow the destructive rush of rainwater, prevent precious topsoil from washing away, and create flat pockets of land where crops can take root. But the execution reveals a deep, sophisticated science. Each terrace is a complex hydrological system in miniature. The retaining wall, often built from stones fitted without mortar, must withstand immense pressure from the earth and water behind it. The terrace bed itself is carefully layered, sometimes with gravel for drainage below and rich soil above. And then comes the masterstroke, the integrated water management. Channels carved along the upper edges of the terraces would capture rainfall or divert it from mountain springs, distributing it evenly from one level to the next through small, controlled openings. This gravity-fed network meant every plot received its share, turning an entire mountainside into a single, efficient irrigation machine. Nowhere is this more breathtakingly displayed than in the Philippine Cordilleras, where the Ifugao people carved what are often called the stairways to the heavens. Their rice terraces, some 2,000 years old, ascend the steepest mountain slopes in majestic, winding ribbons. From a distance, they look like colossal green staircases reaching for the clouds. The Ifugao system is a marvel of communal knowledge passed down orally through generations. They developed specific rice varieties that thrived in the cool, flooded conditions of the highlands. Their maintenance is a continuous, careful ritual of repairing walls, managing water flow, and nurturing the aquatic life within the paddies that contributes to the ecosystem's health. This is not a relic, it is a living landscape, a testament to a sustainable relationship with place that has endured for centuries. Across the ocean, the Inca Empire faced a similar challenge in the rugged Andes. Their solution was the Andeans, terraces that clung to precipitous valleys. Inca engineering took the concept to another level of precision. Their retaining walls were masterclasses in dry stone masonry, with interlocking stones that allowed for drainage and flexibility during earthquakes. Behind these walls, they constructed deep beds of gravel and sand for perfect drainage, topped with fertile soil transported from more temperate valleys. These Andeans were more than farms, they were climate control devices. By creating multiple terraces at different altitudes, the Inca could cultivate a staggering variety of crops, from maize and quinoa in the lower, warmer tiers to potatoes and other tubers in the higher, cooler ones. A single valley could function as an entire agricultural laboratory, maximizing food security and biodiversity. Even in the harsh, arid landscapes of ancient Yemen, terracing transformed scarcity into abundance. In the highlands, sophisticated stone-walled terraces captured the sparse but torrential seasonal rains, channeling every precious drop to fields of sorghum, coffee, and fruit trees. These systems included cisterns and check dams to store water, creating micro-oases that supported thriving communities in what would otherwise be barren rock. The famous Marib Dam, while a larger structure, was part of this same hydrological philosophy, a grand cousin to the countless terrace systems that greened the mountains. This was architecture as a covenant with a dry land, a promise to catch and cherish every gift of water. The legacy of these terraced landscapes is a powerful counter-narrative to the idea of human development as extraction. This was architecture that built soil, conserved water, and created sustainable fertility. It required a long-term vision, a commitment to maintaining walls and channels for the benefit of children's children. It fostered a deep, intimate knowledge of local microclimates, soil types, and hydrology. These were not farmers simply planting seeds. They were landscape architects on a geological scale, patiently negotiating with gravity and rainfall to feed their civilizations. Their greatest monument is not a temple or a tomb, but a living, productive mountain, a testament to the truth that the most vital foundation any society can build is the very ground it cultivates. A civilization's most brilliant ideas are often forged under pressure. When survival is not guaranteed, architecture becomes a shield, and the need for security sparks a distinct form of genius. This is the blueprint of defense, a practical art that produced some of the most formidable and psychologically astute structures ever conceived. To map these fortifications is to understand a society's relationship with threat, its mastery of terrain, and its ability to turn a hilltop or a cliff face into an argument for its own continued existence. These were not just walls, they were three-dimensional chessboards designed for the brutal game of siege warfare, reflecting a deep understanding of tactics, topography, and human nature. Consider the Lion Rock of Sigiriya in Sri Lanka, a monolithic column of red stone that erupts from the jungle plain. In the 5th century, a king chose this natural fortress as his unassailable capital. Its defense began with geography. The sheer cliffs presented a nearly vertical face to any attacker. The only practical approach was via a single, narrow staircase that wound precariously up the rock, a path completely exposed to defenders above. But the genius was layered. Before even reaching the climb, an attacker would have to pass through elaborate water gardens and moats at the base, designed not for beauty but to slow and channel an assault into killing zones. Halfway up, the builders added a stunning gallery, a sheltered walkway clinging to the cliff face protected by a massive mirrored wall. This was both a majestic approach and a controlled bottleneck where a small force could hold off an army. At the summit, the palace complex included cisterns carved directly into the rock to collect rainwater, ensuring the citadel could withstand a prolonged siege. Sigiriya was less a castle and more a statement in stone, declaring that the king's authority was as immovable and untouchable as the mountain itself. On the windswept plains of Celtic Europe, a different defensive logic took shape in the form of hill forts. These were not solitary keeps, but vast communal strongholds. Tribes would identify a hill with commanding views, then reshape its crown with a series of massive earthen ramparts and deep ditches. These were not simple piles of dirt. The ramparts were often reinforced with timber lattices and stone revetments, making them resistant to both battering and erosion. The entrances were masterpieces of defensive confusion, built as long, narrow passages that zigzagged between the high banks. This design, called a baffled gateway, forced attackers to enter in a slow, single file, exposing their flanks to spears, stones, and arrows from defenders on the walls above. Inside, the hill fort contained everything needed for the community and its livestock to live for extended periods, a fortified town that embodied collective security. Their placement created a network of visual communication across the landscape, a silent early warning system where a signal fire on one hill could alert an entire region. In the narrow pass between the Caucasus Mountains and the Caspian Sea, the city of Derbent in present-day Dagestan presented a solution to defending an entire frontier. Its fortification was not a single point, but a linear system of staggering scale. Two massive parallel stone walls stretching from the mountains to the sea were built to channel all north-south movement through a single, heavily fortified gate. This was architecture attempting to control geography itself. The walls themselves were reinforced with dozens of closely spaced towers, allowing defenders to rain projectiles on any point of attack. This design created killing zones in the narrow space between the walls, a concept that would evolve into the concentric castles of the medieval period. Derbent was a strategic choke point made permanent in stone, a millennia-long project maintained by empires from Persia to the Caliphate, showing how defensive architecture could become a permanent feature of geopolitical reality. The vocabulary of these structures reveals their cold intelligence. Murder holes were openings in gatehouse ceilings through which defenders could drop stones, boiling liquids, or burning sand on those trying to break the door. Arrow slits were narrow vertical openings, wide inside but tapering to a thin line on the outside, giving an archer a wide field of fire while presenting a minuscule target. The placement of a well or spring within the innermost ward was as critical as the thickness of the walls, for thirst would defeat an army faster than any sword. Every element, from the slope of the glacis earthwork in front of a wall to the height of the battlements, was a calculated response to the technologies of attack, from scaling ladders and battering rams to tunneling and catapults. Yet these fortresses served a dual purpose. They were both practical instruments of war and potent symbols of power. Their looming presence on the landscape projected authority and deterrence, a constant visual reminder of who controlled the territory and could offer refuge. They safeguarded not just people, but the cultural, economic, and administrative heart of a society during times of conflict. Mapping this defensive architecture does more than catalog military engineering. It reveals periods of intense pressure and innovation. It shows networks of technological exchange as successful designs were observed, adapted, and improved upon across continents. Ultimately, it charts the constant, tense negotiation within a civilization, the balance between its creative energy to build and its consuming need to protect what it has built. The silent, imposing lines of a ruin's walls ask us a fundamental question. What were they so determined to keep safe, and what forces were they so determined to keep out? The fortress walls were designed to keep the world out, but at the heart of every civilization lay a space that sought to let something else in. This was the architecture of the sacred, a realm of stone and shadow built not for defense or dwelling, but for direct communion with the divine. These ritual and ceremonial centers were the spiritual engines of their world, designed with a meticulous, cosmological precision that made them the most durable and ornate of all constructions. To map their features is to trace the blueprint of belief itself, understanding how light, sound, and pathway were orchestrated to create a liminal space, a threshold where the ordinary world fell away and transformation could begin. One of the most profound tools in this sacred toolkit was engineered sound. In the sun-baked hills of Greece, the theater of Epidaurus is famed for its near-perfect acoustics, where a whisper on the stage can be heard clearly in the highest tier. But consider the more intimate, potent acoustics of the underground chamber at Delphi, where the Pythia, the oracle of Apollo, would deliver her prophecies. The room's construction, its shape and materials likely amplified certain sounds, perhaps the bubbling of a sacred spring or the priestess's own voice, creating an otherworldly resonance that would have deepened the mystery and authority of the ritual. This was not an accident of construction. It was an acoustic design meant to alter consciousness, to make the voice of the divine feel present and immediate in the confined, sacred darkness. Above ground, another element was sculpted with equal care, light itself. In the hypostyle halls of Egyptian temples like Karnak, forests of massive columns support a roof that leaves the central aisle slightly higher. Here, stone grills high on the walls allowed narrow shafts of sunlight to pierce the perpetual gloom. These beams would cut through the incense-heavy air, illuminating specific cult statues or ritual objects at precise times, perhaps during a festival or a pharaoh's ceremonial appearance. The architecture manipulated shadow into a sacred curtain, separating the profane outer areas accessible to the public from the increasingly dark and restricted inner sanctuaries, where only the high priests could enter. The journey from bright sun to holy darkness was a physical and spiritual progression, a walking metaphor for approaching the divine mystery. That journey was always carefully choreographed. The processional pathway was a fundamental feature of sacred architecture, a ritual in motion. At the Maya city of Tikal, the wide causeways led pilgrims and priests directly to the foot of towering temple pyramids. The climb up the steep, narrow staircase was not merely physical. It was a symbolic ascent, a reenactment of a mythic journey from the earthly realm to the realm of the gods. Each step elevated the participant literally and spiritually, preparing them for the ceremony at the summit. In the Neolithic complex of Göbekli Tepe, the oldest known temple structures, the pathway winds between massive, T-shaped pillars carved with animals, guiding initiates through a symbolic landscape before they entered the circular enclosures. The path itself was a narrative, building anticipation and framing the ritual space as utterly set apart from the everyday world of hunting and gathering that lay just beyond the hill. These centers were built to cosmological specifications, their orientations fixed to solstice sunrises or the cycles of Venus, anchoring the sacred space within the eternal order of the heavens. The materials were chosen for permanence and symbolism, often the finest stone, the most vivid pigments, the most intricate carvings depicting gods, ancestors, and cosmic events. This investment reveals the spiritual priorities at the absolute core of a society's identity. The ceremonial center was the axis around which the community's calendar, its hierarchy, and its understanding of the universe revolved. Participating in rituals within these architecturally perfected spaces reinforced social cohesion, affirming shared beliefs and a common destiny. To understand this sacred architecture is to move beyond seeing temples as mere buildings. We begin to perceive them as carefully tuned instruments, designed to orchestrate a collective experience of the numinous, using every element of the physical environment to facilitate a moment where the community could touch the eternal and return transformed. A sacred temple's design might begin with a local vision, but its final form could be shaped by whispers from 1,000 miles away. Architectural genius was not always born in isolation. It was a conversation that flowed along the same dusty paths as spices, silk, and stories. This is the principle of diffusion, a map of ideas in motion where a column's profile or a dome's curve could travel across continents, carried by traders, pilgrims, and migrating artisans. To follow these threads is to see the ancient world not as a collection of sealed kingdoms, but as a vast, humming network of shared innovation, where even civilizations later erased left indelible marks on the styles of their neighbors and successors. One of the most vivid examples emerges from the crossroads of Central Asia, in the region of Gandhara. Here, along the Silk Road, a profound fusion gave birth to an entirely new artistic and architectural language. After the conquests of Alexander the Great, Hellenistic artistic traditions, with their love for realistic human form, draped clothing, and classical columns were planted in the East. Centuries later, when Buddhism flourished under the Kushan Empire, these Greek influences met Indian Buddhist spirituality. The result was the Gandharan style, where the Buddha was first depicted in human form, resembling a serene Apollo with wavy hair and robes that fell in graceful stone-carved folds. Architecturally, the Buddhist stupa, a solid mound housing relics, began to incorporate elements like Corinthian pilasters, ornate friezes, and even classical decorative motifs around its base and gateways. This was not mere copying, it was a creative synthesis, using a familiar visual vocabulary from the Mediterranean to give form to a profound spiritual philosophy from India, creating a hybrid that spoke to a cosmopolitan world. The movement of concepts sometimes presents even broader, more tantalizing puzzles. The pyramid form, for instance, appears with striking similarity in places as distant as Egypt, Mesoamerica, and ancient Nubia. While direct contact between these builders is highly unlikely, the similarity speaks to a convergent genius, a shared human response to a universal engineering challenge. How do you build a monumental, stable structure that reaches toward the heavens? The pyramidal shape, with its wide base and sloping sides, is a brilliant answer to the laws of physics, an intuitive solution for achieving great height with primitive materials. Yet within that shared form, the purpose diverges completely. For the Egyptians, it was a resurrection machine for the pharaoh's soul. For the Maya, it was a sacred mountain and a stage for ritual. This parallel invention shows that while grand ideas can sometimes drift on the winds of trade, the deepest architectural impulses often arise independently from shared human needs and the universal constraints of gravity and material. The physical hubs that enabled this diffusion were as important as the ideas themselves. Consider the caravanserai, the fortified inns that dotted the Silk Road every 20 miles or so, a day's journey for a laden camel train. These were not just resting places, they were bustling exchange points. A Persian architect traveling with a merchant caravan might sketch a novel vaulting technique he saw in a Chinese border town. A stonemason from India seeking work in a new market city would bring his unique skills for carving intricate lattice screens. In ports from the Swahili coast to the Mediterranean, shipwrights and merchants exchanged knowledge of timber framing, waterproof mortars, and harbor design. In these cosmopolitan hubs, local traditions were constantly challenged and enriched by foreign techniques. A Swahili palace might incorporate carved coral stone arches inspired by Arab traders, while using traditional mangrove pole ceilings. A Southeast Asian temple complex might blend Indian Hindu layout principles with locally revered spirit house forms and native volcanic stone. These market cities became living laboratories of architectural innovation. By carefully analyzing these stylistic echoes, a specific type of arch here, a decorative motif there, archaeologists and historians can reverse engineer ancient trade and contact routes. The spread of the horseshoe arch from Visigothic Spain into Islamic and later Mozarabic architecture charts a path of cultural exchange on the Iberian Peninsula. The distribution of certain brick-laying patterns or ceramic tile designs can trace the movement of guilds of artisans. This detective work reveals that skilled craftsmen were themselves a prized commodity, often commissioned by rulers or invited to new cities to transfer their knowledge. The map of architectural diffusion, therefore, is also a map of human ambition, curiosity, and economic desire. It shows us that the builders of the past were keen observers, eager adapters, and sophisticated synthesizers. Their legacy reminds us that the most enduring ideas are those that travel, transform, and take root in new soil, creating a world far more interconnected than the silence of ruins first suggests. Stone can outlast kings, but it is no match for a shifting sky. The silent witness to a civilization's final chapter is often not an invading army, but the creeping, relentless change in the very air and water that sustained it. We have mapped how these societies built in harmony with their environment, but that relationship was a fragile contract, one that could be shattered when the planet itself decided to rewrite the terms. To understand complete erasure, we must now listen to the architectural evidence of societies pushed to their breaking point by a changing climate, where brilliant adaptations met their ultimate limit. Their ruins become a new kind of record, not of belief or power, but of a desperate, losing dialogue with an indifferent natural world. Consider the Maya cities of the southern lowlands, like the mighty Tikal. For centuries, their engineers mastered water, creating reservoirs and canal networks that turned seasonal rains into lifeblood. Their architecture was a testament to hydrological control. But core samples taken from lake beds and ancient reservoirs still tell a parallel story, one of a prolonged and severe drought that gripped the region for decades, perhaps even a century. We can see the crisis etched into the urban landscape itself. Archaeologists note modifications to water systems, attempts to deepen canals or expand catchment areas as the rains grew less reliable. The very scale of their reservoirs, once a mark of genius, became a liability as evaporation outstripped replenishment. In the end, the stone conduits lay empty, and the intricate social contract that required a central authority to manage water distribution may have frayed under the strain. The cities were not suddenly abandoned. They likely experienced a slow unraveling, a gradual dispersal as communities sought wetter lands. The towering temples were left not to invaders, but to a deepening silence, as the climate they had so carefully negotiated finally withdrew its support. A world away in the North Atlantic, a different climate story unfolded in stone and sod. The Norse settlements on Greenland, established during the medieval warm period, represent a bold architectural transplant. The settlers built in the style of their Scandinavian homeland, with stone and turf longhouses, churches, and barns. For generations, this adaptation worked. But as the climate cooled into what we call the Little Ice Age, the architecture itself began to tell a story of hardship. Excavations show how later structures were built smaller, with thicker walls for insulation, and were often positioned for maximum shelter from the wind. The bones of livestock reveal a shift in diet, as the settlers relied less on cattle that required winter fodder and more on seal and caribou. The settlements, isolated and reliant on a shipping lifeline that grew more treacherous with increased sea ice, could not adapt enough. Their European building style, so symbolic of their identity, ultimately became a relic in an environment that grew increasingly alien and unforgiving. The last written record from the Western settlement is a wedding receipt from the early 14th century. After that, only silence and the slowly collapsing lines of a house that could no longer keep the cold at bay. These sites force us to read buildings as paleoclimatic diaries. A suddenly thickened defensive wall might speak of new social tensions born from resource scarcity. A granary expanded, then later partitioned into smaller living spaces, could trace the arc from surplus to shortage. The gradual abandonment of upper terraces on a mountainside, with maintenance focusing only on the most reliable plots below, maps a retreating water table. Each modification, each change in construction technique or settlement pattern, is a footnote in a larger story of environmental stress. The architecture shows us their resilience, their attempts to adjust, but also the moment when the scale of the challenge exceeded their capacity to respond. Mapping this relationship delivers a sobering lesson in humility. It highlights that sustainability is not a one-time achievement, but a continuous, dynamic negotiation. A system perfectly adapted to one climatic normal can become a trap when that normal vanishes. The ruins of these societies are therefore more than monuments to past glory. They are cautionary inscriptions. They ask us to consider the long-term resilience of our own vast, interconnected systems in the face of planetary shifts. Their silence is a profound question echoed across time, a reminder that the most ingenious human plans are always, ultimately, subject to the will of the earth itself. The stones may fall silent, but the stories never do. Long before ground-penetrating radar or aerial surveys, the memory of lost places lived on in the most durable medium of all, the human voice passed from one generation to the next. Oral traditions and myth are not just tales for entertainment. They are a profound and often overlooked form of cartography, a cultural map drawn in narrative rather than ink. Within the epic poems, the cautionary fables, and the sacred origin stories of peoples around the world, we find encoded descriptions of architectural genius waiting for someone to understand their language. These stories of sunken cities, golden kingdoms hidden in jungles, or the celestial homes of the gods often preserve kernels of geographical and architectural truth, distorted by time and symbolism, but rooted in a real place and a real memory of achievement. Consider the enduring legend of Atlantis, first described by Plato. While a literal, advanced island continent sinking in a single day is likely philosophical allegory, the core idea has fueled searches for sophisticated prehistoric cultures whose monumental works were later submerged or forgotten by successor civilizations. The story itself functions as a powerful cultural memory of a catastrophic loss, perhaps echoing dim recollections of the Thera eruption that devastated Minoan Crete or other regional collapses, preserving the awe for a civilization that built beyond the ordinary. More directly, indigenous oral histories have repeatedly proven to be accurate guides. In northern Australia, Aboriginal songlines, intricate oral maps of the landscape describing creation journeys, have led archaeologists to ancient quarry sites, rock art, and ceremonial grounds that are thousands of years old. The stories did not give GPS coordinates. They provided a relational map describing the placement of a sacred stone in relation to a waterhole, a distinctive tree, and the path of an ancestor. By listening and learning this narrative geography, researchers could find what was literally written into the land through story. Similarly, in the Pacific Northwest, tribal histories describing villages at river mouths that were later buried by mudslides have been confirmed by core sampling and excavation, revealing longhouse post holes and artifacts exactly where the stories said they would be. These narratives are not mere fiction, they are a form of historical record, filtered through cultural values and the poetic devices of oral transmission. A golden city might symbolize a place of great spiritual power or political influence. A city swallowed by the forest might describe the slow process of abandonment and reclamation after a population moved on. A tale of giants building with massive stones could be a way to express awe at the monumental labor of ancestors, an achievement so grand it seemed superhuman to later generations. The key is to listen for the landscape clues embedded within the myth. Does the story describe a city built between two rivers on a high plateau or beside a bottomless lake? Does it speak of walls that shone in the sun, perhaps referencing a specific type of reflective stone or plaster? Does it recount a great flood that forced a migration which could correlate with known climatic shifts? Treating these traditions with respect as vessels of cultural memory allows us to integrate intangible heritage with tangible evidence. This creates a far richer, more holistic map of the past. It bridges the gap between the archaeological site as a collection of objects and the lived experience of the people who called it home. When we can pair the excavation of a grand plaza with a story about the ceremonies held there, or match the discovery of an intricate water system with a myth about a water deity who taught the people to build canals, the silent stones begin to resonate with meaning. They are no longer just ruins, they are the setting for a story that has been told for 1,000 years. This approach acknowledges that erasure is never complete as long as a story survives. It honors the continuous thread of human storytelling as a primary technology for preserving the memory of greatness. Our modern maps of laser scans and soil samples are invaluable, but they gain profound depth when layered over these ancient narrative maps. Together, they allow us to navigate not just the physical footprint of a lost civilization, but the contours of its imagination, ensuring that the final word on their genius is not spoken by the quiet earth, but by the living echo of their own remembered world. The most powerful map we can draw is one we can step inside. Digital reconstruction has become the final, breathtaking frontier in our quest to see erased civilizations not as ruins but as living worlds. This is the art of using computer-generated imagery, three-dimensional modeling, and virtual reality to resurrect lost cities from the fragments they left behind. It transforms spreadsheets of archaeological data and faded historical sketches into a vibrant, walkable reality. Imagine not just reading about the grandeur of Babylon's Ishtar Gate, but seeing its lapis lazuli blue glaze shimmer under a simulated Mesopotamian sun, or hearing the imagined echoes in the vast plaza of Tenochtitlan's Templo Mayor. These are not fantasies, they are rigorous hypotheses rendered in light and color, built upon a foundation of evidence. teams of archaeologists, historians, and digital artists collaborate, feeding every known detail into the model. They start with the hard facts, the excavated foundations, the surviving wall segments, the pottery shards that hint at paint colors. They consult ancient descriptions, like the writings of Herodotus or indigenous codices, for details of scale and decoration. Then, using principles of period-specific architecture and engineering, they make educated inferences to fill in the gaps, creating a complete, plausible vision of a city at its peak. The Digital Rome Reborn project, for instance, lets you navigate a breathtakingly detailed model of the ancient city at the height of the 4th century. You can fly over the Circus Maximus, walk through the bustling Forum, or stand at the foot of the Colossus of Nero. This immersive scale is transformative. A ground plan on a page shows you layout, but a virtual walkthrough makes you feel the imposing height of a temple, the narrow intimacy of an alleyway, the deliberate sequencing of spaces from public to private. You experience the architectural genius as its original inhabitants might have, understanding how sunlight filtered through a colonnade or how a procession would have moved through a sacred precinct. These reconstructions are dynamic tools for discovery, not just static pictures. Scholars can use them to test theories. Would this roof design have actually supported its own weight given the materials available? Does this proposed alignment of windows create the solstice light effect described in a text? By building the city digitally, they can experiment with its physics and its phenomenology in ways impossible with ruins alone. For the public, this digital cartography erases the final barrier of time. It makes the genius of these builders accessible, immediate, and emotionally resonant. A student in a classroom can don a virtual reality headset and stand in the throne room of a palace they are studying. A curious viewer at home can explore an interactive model online, clicking on buildings to learn their history. This fosters a visceral connection that a textbook or even a visit to a crumbling site often cannot provide. It replaces the silence of erosion with the hum of possibility, letting us hear the faint echo of a city's daily life. In this way, digital reconstruction performs the ultimate act of recovery. It ensures that these civilizations are erased no longer, not even from our imagination. They live again as experiential knowledge, their streets once more filled with the light of understanding, their architectural whispers amplified into a chorus we can finally follow. Our digital tools grant us godlike vision, but with that power comes a profound responsibility. Every line we draw on the map of a lost world is an act of interpretation, and that interpretation is never neutral. The very act of excavation, of writing their history, carries an immense ethical weight. Who, after all, holds the right to tell the story of a people whose own voice has been silenced by time? For centuries, the answer was often the explorer, the colonizer, or the foreign archaeologist, arriving with their own assumptions and agendas. This legacy has left deep scars, where narratives of discovery frequently erased the living connections of descendant communities, framing magnificent sites as abandoned puzzles for outsiders to solve. The ethical map we must draw today is one of partnership, humility, and repatriation. It begins with the principle of cultural patrimony, the idea that a community's artistic, historical, and cultural heritage rightfully belongs to them. This challenges the old museum model where artifacts were extracted, often under dubious circumstances, and displayed continents away from their source. The growing movement for repatriation is not about emptying museums, but about restoring justice. It is the process of returning sacred objects, ancestral remains, and culturally vital items to the communities of origin. This act acknowledges that these are not merely artifacts for study, they are living pieces of a cultural identity, essential for healing and continuity. Think of it as returning a chapter of a story to its rightful book, allowing the narrative to be read whole once more. True ethical mapping, therefore, requires shifting from a model of extraction to one of collaboration. This means involving descendant communities not as subjects, but as essential partners from the very beginning of a research project. It means listening to oral histories not as quaint folklore to be verified by science, but as valid and crucial forms of evidence that provide context no trowel can uncover. It means training and supporting local archaeologists and historians, ensuring the tools of research are shared equitably. When a research team includes community elders, knowledge keepers, and young scholars from the region, the questions we ask change. We stop asking merely how a temple was built and start asking what it meant to the people who worshipped there and what it means to their descendants today. This collaborative approach guards against the imposition of external frameworks. For too long, Western academic theories have been projected onto non-Western sites, sometimes distorting their meaning to fit familiar narratives. A classic example is the persistent, erroneous attribution of Great Zimbabwe to foreign builders, a colonial myth that denied African ingenuity. Ethical mapping actively works to dismantle these narratives, centering indigenous perspectives and epistemologies. It recognizes that the community holds the interpretive key to symbols, patterns, and practices that an outside scholar might completely overlook. The goal is to facilitate reclamation, not just reconstruction. Our maps and models should empower original narratives, giving platform to the voices that have safeguarded memory across generations. This requires a fundamental humility from researchers, an acknowledgement that we are guests in someone else's history, there to assist in its telling, not to author it ourselves. It means publishing findings in accessible formats and languages for the host community, and sometimes accepting that certain knowledge is sacred and not for public dissemination. The ultimate purpose of this ethical framework is to ensure our boundless curiosity serves understanding and respect, never exploitation. We map to reconnect, not to collect. We excavate to restore context, not to claim treasure. When we approach a silent city with this ethos, we do more than study its stones. We participate in an act of cultural reconciliation, helping to mend the broken thread between a glorious past and a living present. The most accurate map we can create is one drawn with many hands, guided by many hearts, charting a path toward a shared and respectful remembrance. A corbelled arch in a Maya palace and another in a Mycenaean tomb share no lineage, only logic. Separated by an ocean and 1,000 years, builders who never knew each other's names arrived at the same elegant solution to a universal problem: how to span an open space with stone. This phenomenon of parallel innovation is one of the most compelling patterns on our map, revealing that architectural genius is not a rare cultural spark, but a latent potential within humanity itself, waiting to be kindled by common challenges. When we see the step pyramids of Mesopotamia's ziggurats echoing in the temples of Angkor and the jungles of Palenque, we are witnessing something far more profound than coincidence. We are observing the convergent evolution of human technology, where similar pressures of environment, spirit, and society sculpt strikingly similar forms from the clay of different worlds. Think of it as a kind of intellectual echo across the continents. The corbelled arch, where each successive stone course projects slightly inward until the gap is bridged at the top, is a perfect example. It emerged in the Bronze Age citadels of Mycenaean Greece, creating the dramatic, triangular relief above the Lion Gate, and it appeared with equal sophistication in the vaulted ceilings of Maya palaces at sites like Palenque. Neither civilization could have learned it from the other. Instead, they both faced the same material constraint, working primarily with stone and lacking a true keystone arch. Their shared genius was to discover the same stable, gravity-defying geometry through independent experiment. It was the most intelligent answer their world of materials could provide. The pyramid form is an even grander testament to this convergence. In the flat floodplain of Mesopotamia, Temple platforms rose as stepped ziggurats, artificial mountains where priests could ascend closer to the gods. In the dense forests of Mesoamerica, pyramids soared as sacred mountains, their stairways a path for ritual processions. In the fertile plains of Southeast Asia, temple mountains like Bakong at Angkor represented the center of the cosmic world. While their symbolic meanings were woven into distinct religious tapestries, their fundamental engineering answer was identical. How do you build a monumental, stable structure that draws the eye and the spirit upward? The pyramidal shape, with its wide base and sloping sides, is nature's own lesson in stability, a direct response to gravity and the limitations of primitive lifting technology. It is the shape a pile of sand naturally takes, and it became the shape of humanity's most ambitious aspirations. This pattern of convergent solutions extends to the very foundations of community. Consider the invention of the wheel. We find it in Mesopotamian carts, but also independently invented in the Americas, where it appears not on chariots, but on small, wheeled animal figurines likely used as toys or ritual objects. The principle was understood, but its application was channeled by different needs, different landscapes, and the absence of suitable draft animals. Similarly, systems of writing emerged separately in at least 4 cradles of civilization: Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and Mesoamerica. Each system is utterly unique in its symbols and structure, yet each answered the same pressing need to record transactions, glorify rulers, and codify belief. The drive to create a permanent record was a shared cognitive leap. What fuels this remarkable convergence? The engine is a combination of universal human needs and common environmental pressures. The need to reach for the divine, to honor leaders or ancestors with enduring monuments, to defend a community, to store surplus grain, to manage water. These are challenges every complex society eventually faces. When you combine these universal needs with similar material constraints, like working with stone, timber, or earth, the menu of optimal solutions is surprisingly limited. Genius, in this light, is the process of discovering the most elegant item on that menu. It is the human mind in different times and places, independently arriving at the same beautiful conclusion because, given the same parameters of physics and desire, it is the most logical conclusion to reach. This perspective liberates us from old, simplistic diffusionist theories that sought to trace every innovation back to a single source. It moves us toward a more empowering and accurate view that the toolkit for building civilization is a shared human inheritance. The capacity for abstract geometry, for understanding load and stress, for symbolic representation in stone, these are not gifts bestowed on one culture alone. They are innate potentials. What varies is the historical moment, the environmental pressure, the coalescence of social will and visionary leadership that brings that potential to fruition. A society in a fertile river valley with a centralized priesthood will likely invent monumental temple architecture. A society in a rugged landscape with limited arable land will likely perfect terracing. Their solutions will look alike because the problems at their core are alike. Mapping these parallels does not diminish the uniqueness of each culture. It elevates our understanding of our shared humanity. It suggests that the seeds of the pyramids, the arches, and the written word were scattered everywhere, waiting only for the right conditions of need, resource, and collective vision to bloom. When we stand before the silent, similar stones of worlds that never touched, we are not seeing evidence of a lost global connection. We are seeing a reflection of our own universal mind, capable of dreaming the same majestic shapes into reality, again and again, across the great and lonely expanses of time. Their silent stones are not just monuments, they are mentors. The architectural genius of civilizations erased by time did not vanish with them. It simply entered a long period of dormancy, waiting for a new generation of builders to rediscover its logic. This is a living legacy, a continuous thread that connects the cliff dwellings of Mesa, Verde to the skyscrapers of today, proving that the most profound solutions are often the most ancient. Modern architecture is now engaged in a quiet but profound conversation with these lost masters, not through imitation, but through a shared reverence for the fundamental principles of place, material, and human need. We are relearning in our own language of steel and glass what they knew in stone and earth. Look at the soaring atrium of a contemporary office building, designed to pull hot air upward and draw in cool breezes from below. This is the same principle of passive ventilation that guided the builders of ancient Persian wind catchers, those ingenious tower structures that captured even the faintest desert wind, cooled it through subterranean channels, and delivered fresh air into homes without a single watt of electricity. A modern architect studying those wind catchers is not copying a style, she is downloading 1,000-year-old data set on thermal dynamics, a proven code for comfort written in clay and airflow. Or consider the renewed fascination with structural honesty, the idea that a building should not hide how it stands up. The brutalist concrete of the 20th century and the exposed steel beams of today's industrial lofts find a philosophical ancestor in the impeccable masonry of the Inca. At Machu Picchu, every stone proclaims its purpose, each irregular block locked into a resilient, earthquake-proof puzzle. There is no facade masking a weaker frame, no decorative veneer. The structure is the aesthetic, a testament to integrity that modern minimalism strives to emulate. This is not about nostalgia for a rustic look. It is about a return to authenticity, to materials that speak their own truth. Even our most forward-looking urban experiments often look backward for wisdom. The concept of the walkable, mixed-use neighborhood, where homes, workshops, and communal spaces are densely integrated, feels strikingly modern. Yet we see a brilliant early prototype in Çatalhöyük, one of the world's first known cities in ancient Anatolia. There, houses were clustered together, entered through holes in the roof, with shared walls for efficiency and a social fabric woven into the very layout. There were no grand royal avenues, just a honeycomb of interconnected life. Today's urban planners fighting urban sprawl and social isolation are grappling with the same core question the residents of Çatalhöyük answered: how do we build not just housing but community? The ancient world is becoming a primary textbook for the emerging field of biomimicry and sustainable design. The termite mound, a structure that maintains perfect internal temperature and humidity through passive design, has inspired buildings in Zimbabwe that use similar chimney effects for cooling, drastically reducing the need for air conditioning. This is a direct line from observing nature's genius, a practice every ancient builder engaged in, to applying it at scale. The green roofs and rainwater catchment systems now topping eco-cities are sophisticated echoes of the hanging gardens of Babylon and the intricate Cholton reservoirs of the Maya. When a contemporary architect designs a building that generates its own power, manages its own water, and uses local materials, she is walking a path first carved by civilizations that had no other choice but to be perfectly sustainable. Their constraints birthed principles that our abundance made us forget, and now their necessity is becoming our salvation. This ongoing dialogue transforms ancient ruins from static relics into dynamic repositories of relevant knowledge. They are not just places we visit, they are case studies we consult. By mapping how past societies solved eternal problems of space, light, resource management, and social cohesion, we are not merely uncovering history, we are downloading a toolkit for the future. The silent city, therefore, never truly falls silent. Its lessons are simply waiting for the right moment to be heard again, reminding us that the most innovative path forward might just begin with a careful, respectful look back. A perfect map would be a confession that curiosity had died. Our technological sight has peeled back jungles and scanned the earth, yet some stones refuse to tell their story. These are the places on the edge of the chart, marked not with certainty, but with a question that hums with possibility. They are the enduring mysteries, the architectural feats that stand before us in plain sight, yet seem to whisper from a logic we have not yet learned to hear. These sites are the blank spaces on our map, and they are perhaps its most important feature. Take the rolling hills of southeastern Turkey, where the world's oldest known megaliths rise from the earth. Göbekli Tepe was built over 11,000 years ago, a staggering 7 millennia before the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its circles of massive, T-shaped pillars, each intricately carved with foxes, scorpions, and birds of prey, were erected by hunter-gatherers. This fact alone appends our traditional narrative. We have long believed that monumentality, this drive to reshape the landscape on a grand scale, was the product of settled, agricultural societies with surplus labor and complex hierarchies. Göbekli Tepe suggests the opposite. It implies that the need to build something profound for a shared spiritual purpose may have been what brought people together in the first place, potentially catalyzing the very shift toward settled life. But what was that purpose? Was it a temple, a celestial observatory, a memorial complex? The pillars are too dense for a roof, suggesting open-air rituals. The carvings are potent symbols, but their specific stories are lost. The site was deliberately buried, filled in with rubble, as if to preserve it for eternity. Its silence is deliberate and profound, a challenge to our most basic assumptions about the sequence of civilization itself. Then there is the shattered, geometric puzzle of Puma Punku, part of the Tiwanaku complex in the Bolivian highlands. Here, the stonework moves beyond precision into the realm of the surreal. Enormous blocks of andesite and red sandstone are cut with faces so flat and edges so sharp they look machined. Interlocking H-shaped clasps, perfect right angles, and channels cut with unerring straightness are scattered like a giant's discarded toolkit. The scale and complexity are bewildering, especially considering these stones are among the hardest on Earth. The methods used to cut, dress, and transport them remain a subject of intense debate and experimentation. While mainstream archaeology points to sophisticated, patient techniques using stone tools, sand abrasion, and copper alloys, the sheer perfection of the work continues to inspire awe and speculation. Puma Punku does not just ask how it was done, it asks what kind of knowledge, what school of geometry and engineering flourished here that we have no record of. It feels less like a ruin and more like a blueprint for a technology that has since slipped from our grasp. From the dizzying geometry of stone, we shift to the monumental art of the desert floor. The Nazca lines of Peru are a different kind of mystery, one of perspective and purpose. Etched into the dark, rocky crust of the plateau by removing the top layer of stones, these enormous glyphs of spiders, hummingbirds, monkeys, and geometric shapes are only coherent from high above. They were created between 2,000 and 1,500 years ago, a time when human flight was a myth. So why create art you can never see? The theories are as vast as the drawings themselves. Some researchers suggest they were ritual pathways walked by priests during ceremonies related to water and fertility, their forms visible to mountain deities. Others propose astronomical alignments, linking the lines to solstices or star patterns. They might have been a colossal map of underground water sources. The truth is, no single explanation satisfies the scale and variety of the figures. They resist categorization, existing in a category of their own, a form of landscape architecture meant for an audience not entirely human. These sites are not failures of our mapping project. They are its essential engine. A mystery is not a dead end, it is an invitation. Göbekli Tepe challenges our timeline, forcing us to reconsider the motivations behind society's first steps. Puma Punku tests the limits of our understanding of ancient engineering and logistical planning. The Nazca lines question the very relationship between art, ritual, and the landscape. They remind us that our current paradigms are temporary, always one discovery away from being reshaped. The blank spaces on the map are not voids, they are spaces of potential, where the next generation of researchers, perhaps using tools not yet invented, will write new chapters. These enduring puzzles ensure that our conversation with the past never becomes a monologue. They are the guarantees that the map will never be finished, that the most thrilling discoveries are not behind us, but ahead, waiting in the quiet patience of stone and earth for the right question to be asked. Their enduring puzzles remind us that our map remains beautifully incomplete. This journey across the silent cities has been more than a survey of ruins. It is a testament to the resilient flame of human ingenuity, a light that often shines with startling brilliance just before it vanishes from history's view. We began by listening to that profound quiet, the true meaning of erasure, and equipped ourselves with new eyes, from laser scanners that strip away forests to the patient wisdom of oral tradition. We have seen how these lost builders initiated a dialogue with their environment, turning cliff faces into climate-controlled homes and monsoon rains into empires. We have traced their celestial blueprints where temples became stone calendars aligned with the sun's rebirth. We have measured the monumental scale of their collective will, societies that could move mountains through unified purpose. From the material alchemy of rust-proof iron to the social architecture of terraced mountainsides, each principle reveals a mind not so different from our own, solving eternal problems with the tools at hand. Their silent stones are not inert relics of a finished past. They are active, urgent lessons. In their passive cooling and water capture, we find a masterclass in sustainable design our planet now desperately needs. In their processional pathways and communal plazas, we see blueprints for building social connection in an age of isolation. In their sheer, awe-inspiring ambition, we are reminded that humanity is capable of horizon-altering projects when united by a shared vision. These places challenge our modern arrogance, suggesting that sophistication is not a linear progression, but a recurring discovery. To walk among them is to engage in a conversation across time, one that asks us to look at the ancient places of our world with new eyes. See them not as graveyards, but as maps of human potential, each line and angle a record of a question asked and a brilliant answer given in stone. If this voyage into lost genius has resonated with you, if it has sparked a new curiosity for the hidden chapters of our shared story, your journey does not have to end here. Consider subscribing for more deep dives into the mysteries that shape our understanding of who we are. And we would love to hear from you. Which erased civilization, which silent city, speaks to your imagination most powerfully? Share your thoughts in the comments below, for the map we are drawing together is never finished. It is a living document, and your curiosity, your wonder, is the most essential tool we have to ensure these voices from the dust are never truly forgotten.